In this video here, Pestily runs through how he makes millions of rubles simply by buying items from the traders and selling them back onto the flea market. Today's question then, is this right? Should the game allow us to do this, or does this type of activity go against everything that Tarkov stands for? To quickly set the background for those who haven't been keeping up with the machinations of the Tarkov sphere, at the beginning of the previous wipe, items sold on the flea market still required a find and raid tag in order to be listed. This meant that after spawning in a raid, these items were only allowed to be extracted from a single raid one time, as they would lose their tag when brought into another match or sold, meaning that you couldn't sell anything that other players had brought in or anything purchased on the flea market. With a few months to go until patch 15, BSG changed this so you could once again list items on the flea without the tag. This only affected buying and selling, so quest items still needed to be found and survived with. So far, so good. The two biggest changes resulting from this is that most PvP loot could once again be sold on the flea, which greatly improved the profitability of fighting other players, something that the fighty proportion of the community had wanted ever since Find and Raid had been introduced. But it also allowed players to buy items directly from the traders or the flea itself and relist them straight back onto the market. Given we were close-ish to the end of the wipe when this change was made, it didn't have that much effect at the time. The most consistent players were mega flush with cash anyway because of the high price of Bitcoin, and it didn't make sense for people to bother spending time looking for ways to make additional income on the flea. So, as patch 15 rolled through, these changes remained, but early wipe is an entirely different ballgame where we got to see the actual effects. Players are typically starved for cash and are actively trying to make as much as possible to feed the many money sinks, including gearing up for raids directly without decent trader access and vast quantities being spent on upgrading the hideout. What's more is that you have the greatest trader level and quest disparity in the first month or so of a new wipe, which is partly dictated by skill and experience but primarily through time played. Those who can race through the progression and access level 3 and 4 trader inventories early can benefit disproportionately compared to those who arrive there later. This is a simple case of supply and demand, and when few are able to access sought after items but there are many that need them, the prices naturally reflect this and enrich the fast progressors dramatically. In Pest's video, the items that he shows are almost always trader level 3 and 4 items, or those that are quest locked, so the average player right now cannot buy these things on their own, which of course is why there is so much profit to be made in the first place. This is the main point that is usually brought up against the new system, that players who are ahead have the ability to get way more money than they used to in previous wipes. I have even made this argument myself and was staunchly against this, but after seeing it in practice and thinking about it some more, I'm not actually sure that it matters. These people who are level 40 plus 1 week into a wipe, you aren't going to stop them being on top of the player base. All that happened this wipe is that rather than having 10 million, they now have 30. This literally makes zero difference to how they play in raid. They're still skilled, they'll still have the best gear available to them, and most of the time their loadout isn't even related to money specifically. It's widely recognised that actual rubles in Tarkov isn't the bottleneck for endgame players, and hasn't been for years. Other elements being quest progression, level, and experience for skills are more what these players are going for, so I've changed my mind, and I don't think it's a problem. You could also argue that scav runs, and more specifically the new arena link, are as much of a money issue as trader flipping, allowing players to easily move 1.5 million rubles per day to the base game while only taking an hour or so to make it in arena, and are accessible to many more players, not just those who ground through the quests quickly. Tarkov's economy is flooded with money. That's just the state of the game these days, and to counter it, you'd have to dramatically change the way that the game is played by making it much more hardcore, removing or changing the traders a lot, and getting rid of the flea too, to get back to the original core experience that people had 8 years ago. The problem with this, it likely makes the game impossible to play for new players. There's no great compromise here that can be had, which both fixes how easy it is to get money for experienced players versus how hard the game is for those that are new. I've been very interested in a separate hardcore account for ages, and the new marathon mode has shown us a little taster of what this could be like. If BSG can leverage modes like marathon that allow experienced players a proper challenge with the rule set built into the game itself, but without splitting the player base, that could be a fantastic way to go about making something that works for everyone. So the next supposed issue is removing the early game by having mid-tier items available on the flea market. This is something else that I was concerned about previously, but in reality it has some interesting self-balancing effects on the economy. On day 1, no one, or at least very few people, have access to the flea market, and for the real early game you still have this hurdle at level 15 before you can access the player economy. This still takes some doing for the average player. Once you get there, many items become available as normal, and like before, you have the ability to buy ammo and armor above your trader level. But as players progress through and gain access to the higher trader levels, any item that has a wide price difference between the flea and the trader price gets flipped. A good example early is AP 6.3. This is a solid upgrade to PST for 9mm weapons, and as more and more players get onto Peacekeeper 3, the price gets lower and lower until it's only marginally more than buying from the trader directly. As of recording this video, we're only 2 weeks into the wipe, so we can see that level 4 bullets like M856A1 have remained pretty expensive, as there's only a handful of players that can actually buy it to resell, with much greater demand. Now that global limits are gone though, the personal limits keep a much better handle on potentially vast quantities of ammo from being turned by a small number of players, as you can't actually buy that much each reset. The most interesting outcome of all though is that a player starting 2 months into the wipe will likely find that at level 15 they are able to quickly participate in the mid game if they have the funds to do so through class 4 armor and good mid-tier ammo like M856A1. Many more players will have access to level 4 traders at this stage, and so the ammo price should theoretically at least be close to the trader price plus the flea tax, and give those who are behind a leg up to actually compete when starting late. Remember, you still had to get to level 15 with no fleet access at all, effectively playing on hardcore until then, as the level 1 traders are pretty poor in terms of what they offer. There's a common perception amongst more casual players that if you don't start at the beginning of a Tarkov wipe, you're basically screwed, can't participate and have to wait until the next one. Whether this is precisely true or not, or a blend of the two, is not really important. With the new system, if players can make it to level 15, they will immediately be able to jump up to a minimum spec PvP loadout, which when joining a few months in, I think will simply prevent the experience from being miserable. Let's not forget that the flea market has many bans in place. High tier ammo? Nope, 41 pen is as high as you can go after the sensible rework done in patch 15. High tier armor? Also nope, class 4 is the best you can get, with the exception of side plates, so anything level 5 and 6 is also blocked. This means that you do still have to do some work if you want to access the better stuff in Tarkov. We know now that the Bastion helmet covers, the Death Shadow masks, the spear and others have been removed from the flea market, and all class 6 armor has been removed from the traders too, and so now needs to be found in raid instead, so it's not like you can just buy your way through to the meta loadouts anymore without doing actual work in raid. This also makes these items more scarce, and then increases the tension to extract if you find one of them, which is what Tarkov is all about in the first place. On this basis, I feel like patch 15 is probably the most well balanced for the different portions of the community than it ever has been. Casual players get a leg up through the fleet depending on when they join in the wipe, with market mechanics dynamically reducing prices for items available on higher level traders that aren't banned on the flea market themselves. This allows them to get started, but they still have to do the work to access better items like class 5. High level players can make tons of money to facilitate this, but they had loads anyway, so it hardly matters. But this money can no longer be used to buy the best stuff like last wipe, giving them things to do in raid and to actually feel a sense of progression by looting instead of looking for pure ruble value. On top of that, PvP actually feels rewarding now because you can resell most of a player's kit off onto the flea market. There are also some people who hate the early wipe and just want to get onto the better stuff, and these people can now play arena instead at the start and reach the flea that way. Or also those players who just need a bit of an XP boost to engage in the mid game rather than trying and failing repeatedly to get that last little bit of XP from level 12 to level 15. Lastly, those who enjoy simply playing the market can do that as well. This doesn't really do anything other than enrich the flipper, who probably won't be spending it all anyway, and technically speaking actually removes money from the game due to the flea market fees. It's important to remember what the sources of actual rubles are in Tarkov. There really are only a handful, with the most important one being selling items to the traders directly, questing and finding money directly in raid, and the last two are pretty small sources anyway. All activity on the flea market is just from one player to another, so it doesn't increase the overall amount of cash available to the player base. Indeed, it is technically deflationary because of the flea market fee continuously chipping away at the overall player ruble count with every transaction. There is a new source of money this wipe which is meaningful, the previously mentioned Tarkov Arena, which simply gives out rubles for playing, and this may certainly contribute to the item inflation in patch 15. But in light of the extremely high value of Bitcoin in-game, that is probably much more impactful over the full course of a wipe in my opinion. So yeah, on trader flipping, I've changed my mind, at least for now. Let's see how the rest of this one plays out, especially in the end game, but despite still feeling like I don't really like trader flipping particularly, the effects that it has had on the game for casual players when combined with the other changes such as global limits and flea bans actually looks pretty good. So as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.